When a 23-year-old YouTuber's 42-minute investigation receives 100 million views, more than most Super Bowl broadcasts, more than most presidential speeches, more than every mainstream media investigation combined in a year, you're not witnessing viral content. You're witnessing the moment when citizen journalism definitively replaced institutional media as the primary source of truth for Americans. When Senate Committee Chairman Ron Johnson announces he's reaching out to that YouTuber for testimony and will use subpoena power to obtain financial records, when Kash Patel confirms FBI agents are surging investigative criminal units into Minnesota, with public takedowns of more Somali fraudsters coming soon, when J.D. Vance calls Minnesota a microcosm of the immigration fraud in our system, you're not observing slow-building investigation. You're observing federal response to documentation so compelling that political protection becomes impossible. And when a Somali woman records a video claiming Trump should be grateful for what Somalis brought to Minnesota, that their success should be applauded, that they've made the state pop and beautiful for the rest of the world, while federal prosecutors document $18 billion in fraud, while daycare centers with no children collect millions, while empty buildings with misspelled signs operate for years without inspection, you're witnessing cognitive dissonance so profound it becomes evidence of a community that genuinely believes welfare fraud is entrepreneurship and systematic theft is achievement. This is the story of how 100 million views changed everything. How Nick Shirley's investigation triggered federal raids, congressional subpoenas, and national reckoning. How Tim Walz went into hiding while whistleblowers came forward with bombshell claims of retribution. How Ilhan Omar's husband's firm suddenly scrubbed Obama officials from their website as the $30 million in unexplained wealth became indefensible. And how a community that spent years operating openly fraudulent enterprises is discovering that viral video documentation creates accountability that political protection cannot prevent. Nick Shirley's viral investigation was impressive, but his companion David's research provides the systematic documentation that transforms individual cases into proof of industrial-scale fraud. David's testimony is methodical and devastating. I've been to literally 40 or 50 of these childcare centers, and there's never been a single child at any one of them ever. Morning, afternoon, evening. Some of them say they're open until 10 at night. I go there in the morning, I go there in the afternoon, I go there at 9 at night. Nobody, there are no kids there ever. 50 facilities, multiple visits to each, different times of day. 0 children, ever. This isn't sampling, it's census. David didn't visit a few suspicious locations. He systematically documented that the absence of children in facilities claiming to serve 80, 120 kids each is universal. Not some facilities have no kids. All facilities have no kids. And this research began 5 years ago. David describes his initial discovery. I would watch and I said, well, there aren't any kids there. I'd go to another one, there aren't any kids there, and I'd see just some guys, some Somali guys outside smoking cigarettes. He tried engaging with operators. Hey, I'm just wondering, I've got a grandson who's looking for childcare and I wonder if this might be a good facility. The response, we're all full, we're all full. David looked inside. There were no kids. There was like a couch and a table with a couple of chairs. When he questioned this, the operator became hostile. You go, and physically pushed him out, then followed him to his car. That was 5 years ago. 5 years of David documenting fraud, reporting it, trying to get investigation. And nothing happened until Nick Shirley created video evidence that went viral and forced federal response. While federal investigators examine Minnesota's $18 billion in program spending, another question demands answer. How did Ilhan Omar go from basically broke when she came into office to accumulating a $30 million net worth? Her congressional salary is $174,000 annually, generous for most Americans, but mathematically insufficient to accumulate $30 million even if she saved every penny and paid no taxes or living expenses. Now we learn that her husband's firm, worth nearly zero, suddenly became worth $25 million in just 1 year. And that firm's website, which previously listed prominent Obama officials, has been scrubbed of those names as federal investigation intensifies. Obama ambassador to Bahrain, Adam Airley, former senator and Obama ambassador to China, Max Baucus, DNC finance chair, associate Alex Hoffman, former DNC treasurer William Darrow, former Amalgamated Bank CEO Keith Mestrick, described as the institutional bank of the Democratic Party. Why scrub these names now? What's the connection between Obama officials, a firm that went from 0 to 25 million in 1 year, and Ilhan Omar's unexplained wealth accumulation? The timing suggests consciousness of guilt. As Nick Shirley's investigation exposes the systematic fraud Omar enabled through the Meals Act, as federal prosecutors document billions stolen through programs she championed, as her citizenship itself faces investigation, her husband's firm suddenly removes evidence of connections to Democratic officials and financial institutions. This is the behavior of people who know investigation is coming and are desperately trying to destroy evidence of how money flowed from welfare fraud through consulting firms to political operators. A Minnesota realtor provides another piece of the fraud puzzle. Somalis are buying residential homes, claiming they're converting them to home health care centers and collecting millions in government payments while providing no actual health care. The realtor's account is specific and damning. In her community alone, Somalis have bought up over 455 homes. They buy these homes, claiming they're turning them into home health care centers. How do neighbors know these are fraud operations? All of a sudden, extremely nice cars start showing up. Mercedes, BMWs, the nicest cars are parked in the driveway. People collecting welfare checks for providing home health care services to vulnerable populations shouldn't be driving luxury cars purchased with cash. But that's exactly what's happening. The systemic failure is bureaucratic. By law, the state will not come out and inspect these homes and make sure these homes even have clients living in them. Read that again. The state is prohibited from inspecting facilities receiving millions in taxpayer money to verify that the services being billed actually exist. This isn't oversight failure, it's deliberate removal of oversight. And the realtor faces legal restrictions on disclosure. As a realtor, I cannot disclose to people wanting to buy homes in this neighborhood that Somalis have bought that home and they're using it as a home health care center. Even when potential homebuyers are unknowingly moving next to facilities that can even take people in who have just been released from jail, realtors are legally prohibited from warning them. The result: many of these homes do not even have clients in them, but the state is writing them checks every month for the clients that the Somalis say are in these homes. Empty homes collecting government checks for non-existent clients. The exact same pattern as daycare centers with no children, healthcare facilities with no patients, and transportation companies providing no rides. It's not a handful of bad actors. It's a systematic business model, claim to provide government-funded services, remove inspection requirements, collect millions, provide nothing. One of the most revealing moments in Nick Shirley's investigation isn't the empty facilities or the hostile operators. It's the white liberal woman who follows him around screaming, "Don't open up, he's ICE," while he tries to document fraud. Shirley explains repeatedly, "Ma'am, I'm a YouTuber, I'm not ICE." Her response, "I don't care who you are. You don't belong here." She's informed that the facility is licensed for 99 children, received $1.9 million in 2025, and has no children. That taxpayer money, including her money, is funding operations that provide no services. Her response: keep screaming about ICE, keep warning facilities not to open, keep protecting fraud from documentation. This woman represents the ideological capture that enabled Minnesota's fraud to operate openly for years. She values not being perceived as racist or supportive of immigration enforcement more than she values preventing theft of her own tax dollars. When a neighbor who's lived near the facility for 8 years is asked if she's seen children there, her answer is immediate: nope, not at all. And how does that make you feel, knowing this place has received $1.9 million? Disgusting. I mean, what the hell? They're stealing the money. 2 women. Same facts. One recognizes obvious fraud and expresses appropriate outrage. The other screams to protect the fraud because challenging it might make her seem insufficiently progressive. This dynamic, progressive ideology providing protection for criminal enterprise, explains how Minnesota's fraud operated openly for years. Anyone who investigated risked being called racist. Anyone who questioned Somali-operated programs faced accusations of Islamophobia. Better to let billions be stolen than risk being labeled bigoted. After Nick Shirley and David documented fraud at multiple facilities, they were followed. Somali men in vehicles trailing their car, filming them, creating implicit threat. The video shows this clearly. Holy crap, I missed the part where Somalis were stalking and following Nick Shirley and Dave after they got daycare fraud on camera. Now we're being followed by Somalis. This is witness intimidation, creating atmosphere of threat to discourage investigation and documentation, making clear that exposing fraud has consequences beyond political accusations, potential physical danger, but the intimidation failed. The video was posted. 100 million people watched. And rather than frightening other investigators away, it provided evidence of consciousness of guilt. Legitimate business people don't follow and film journalists who ask questions about their operations. Criminals do. As Nick Shirley's investigation went viral and federal response intensified, Tim Walz disappeared from public view. No press conferences, no statements, no defense of his administration's oversight. What emerged instead, a 2023 tweet celebrating his support for childcare providers. Minnesota's economy doesn't work without childcare providers, so we're giving them a raise. That tweet, posted while fraud was ongoing, now reads as self-incrimination. Walz wasn't just ignorant of fraud, he was actively increasing funding to fraudulent operations while suppressing employee warnings. Representative Tom Emmer's analysis is devastating. Whistleblowers are coming forward, and if they are real and if what they're saying can be documented, what they're saying is they told Tim Walz, they told Keith Ellison about the fraud when it was happening, and they not only didn't do anything, they retaliated against them. If that's true, if that can be documented, these guys need to be prosecuted, held accountable, and prosecuted to the full extent of the law. This isn't speculation. Emmer is describing active whistleblower testimony claiming 1. They reported fraud directly to Walz and Attorney General Ellison. 2. Officials not only failed to investigate. 3. Officials retaliated against whistleblowers who reported fraud. If documented, this is criminal conspiracy, not negligence, not incompetence, deliberate suppression of fraud investigation combined with retaliation against those who reported it. The betting markets giving Walz 69% odds of facing federal criminal charges reflect this reality. When whistleblowers document that you were warned of fraud, deliberately didn't investigate, and punished those who reported it, that's criminal conduct. FBI Director Kash Patel's statements confirm that Nick Shirley's investigation exposed far more than daycare fraud. Somali fraudsters are being referred for denaturalization and deportation, and what we publicly know is only the tip of a very large iceberg. We will continue to follow the money and protect children, and this investigation very much remains ongoing. Furthermore, many are also being referred to immigration officials for possible denaturalization and deportation proceedings where eligible. Parse that language, only the tip of a very large iceberg. The $18 billion in documented fraud is preliminary. Full investigation will reveal far more. Denaturalization and deportation. Not just criminal prosecution, immigration fraud investigations that could result in citizenship revocation. Follow the money, financial investigations tracking where stolen billions went, potentially implicating additional political figures. Investigation very much remains ongoing. This isn't concluding, it's escalating. Patel's statement, combined with reports that FBI is surging investigative criminal units into Minnesota with public takedowns of more Somali fraudsters coming soon, indicates federal law enforcement is treating Minnesota as organized criminal enterprise requiring major operation. This is unprecedented. Federal government doesn't surge investigative criminal units for isolated welfare fraud. That language describes response to systematic criminality requiring coordinated federal action. Ron Johnson, I will use subpoena power. Senate Committee Chairman Ron Johnson's announcement that he's reaching out to Nick Shirley and will use subpoena power to obtain these records transforms citizen journalism into official congressional investigation. Johnson's statement is significant. We're already reaching out to Nick Shirley and David and other people who can provide testimony, but we also need documents. I have subpoena power. I will use that subpoena power to obtain these records. This means official congressional testimony from citizen journalists whose investigation exposed what government oversight missed, subpoena authority to force production of financial records that states have hidden or refused to provide federal investigation with resources and authority far beyond what YouTube journalists can access. Johnson specifically targets the federal-state failure. These agencies' heads who funnel the federal money to state agencies, they have to demand the state agencies are transparent. In Democrat states, they're not. He's identifying the systemic problem. Federal government sends billions to state-administered programs without requiring verification that services exist. States like Minnesota then distribute that money without oversight, knowing federal government won't investigate as long as Democrats control oversight agencies. But Trump's return changed that calculation. Federal agencies are no longer politically constrained from investigating Democratic states, and congressional committees are using subpoena power to force document production states previously withheld. Vice President J.D. Vance's framing connects Minnesota's specific fraud to national immigration policy. What's happening in Minnesota is a microcosm of the immigration fraud in our system. It's a zero-sum game, and they're stealing both money and political power from Minnesotans. Vance isn't just criticizing welfare fraud. He's arguing that Minnesota represents a broader pattern where immigration policy is exploited for political gain. Import populations through refugee resettlement and sanctuary policies. Make those populations dependent on welfare fraud that states deliberately don't investigate secure political loyalty, from communities that know investigating fraud threatens their economic survival. Convert imported populations into voters through amnesty or birthright citizenship. This is the strategy Elon Musk described, using taxpayer money to import electoral majorities. Minnesota is just the most visible example because Nick Shirley created documentation too compelling to suppress. Fox News' attempt to contact the Quality Leering Center revealed another layer of fraud. The phone number listed on the facility doesn't work. This facility received $1.9 million in 2025, is licensed for 99 children, has a misspelled sign leering instead of learning lists, a non-functional phone number, has no visible children despite claiming to operate childcare, but somehow passed whatever inspection Minnesota claims to conduct and continued receiving millions in taxpayer funding. The non-functional phone number is perfect symbol of the fraud. Even the pretense of operating a business is abandoned. They don't need working phones because they're not providing services. They're just collecting checks. Perhaps the most revealing response to federal investigation comes from a Somali woman who recorded a video claiming Trump should thank Somalis for their success in Minnesota. Her argument is extraordinary in its disconnect from reality. I think Trump should be thanking us in multiple ways. First, we are a good example of what the American dream can look like. Somalis in Minnesota are so successful. You have Somali-owned law firms, Somali-owned pharmacy, Somali-owned everything you can think of. She describes visiting Minnesota and being inspired by Somali success, claiming they achieved this despite being black Muslim immigrant and arriving not speaking English, not knowing anything. She demands recognition. I need Trump to stand up and applaud for us because it's shocking. She credits Somalis with making Minnesota relevant. Trump, You should be thanking my people for giving a random Midwestern state that much clout and money. Minnesota is really popping when it comes to tourism because of Somali Americans. Minnesota would have been nothing if we didn't move there." And she concludes with defiant confidence, "I'm Somali American, Broski, like I'm winning on both sides." This video is remarkable not for any single claim, but for its complete inability to acknowledge the documented fraud. She sees Somali-owned businesses and interprets this as entrepreneurial success, rather than shell companies created to bill government programs. She sees expensive cars and nice homes and interprets this as achievement, rather than evidence of wealth gained through theft. The disconnect is so profound, it suggests either genuine ignorance. She truly doesn't know that the success she celebrates is built on welfare fraud, community normalization. Fraud is so universal that it's become invisible, just how business is done. Defensive denial. She knows about fraud but can't psychologically accept that her community's apparent prosperity is criminal. Regardless of explanation, her video perfectly captures why Minnesota's fraud operated openly. The community genuinely believes collecting government money through fake daycare centers and empty healthcare facilities is legitimate business operation, and anyone who investigates is attacking their success rather than prosecuting their crimes. Representative Tom Emmer's comparison is devastating in its simplicity. It's amazing to me that a 23-year-old journalist, a YouTuber who's now got over 80 million views on this thing, found more in a matter of hours than Tim Walz and Keith Ellison have found in 7 years. This isn't hyperbole. Nick Shirley literally documented more fraud in one day than Minnesota's governor and attorney general acknowledged in 7 years of governance. How is this possible? Emmer explains, "We've known in Minnesota about the daycare fraud for a decade. Keith Ellison is our current Attorney General. His predecessor, Lori Swanson, was actually investigating and prosecuting back in 2017 and 2018. As soon as Ellison became Attorney General and Walz became governor, all of that stopped. The fraud wasn't hidden. Investigation was active. Prosecution was occurring. Then Democrats took control and investigation ceased. Not because fraud stopped, because political protection began. The program explosion confirms this. There was a housing stabilization program created in 2020. It's through the Medicaid program. They spent $161 million. It was estimated it was going to be $2 million a year. From 2020 until they shut it down in October, it was $161 million. 80 times budget in 3 years. This isn't program overrun. This is systematic looting enabled by officials who deliberately don't investigate because investigation threatens political support. And individual cases reveal the scale. This daycare fraud, there's one woman in particular who created a fake daycare and billed $14 million on her own. One person, $14 million from a single fake daycare, and somehow this wasn't caught by Minnesota's oversight systems, despite being obvious fraud that a 23-year-old with a camera documented in hours. Reports indicate FBI agents have been photographed carrying boxes of files from Ultimate Home Health Services in Bloomington after the state suspended its license this month after discovering alleged fraud. Federal prosecutor's statement is extraordinary. What we see in Minnesota is not a handful of bad actors committing crimes. It's staggering industrial-scale fraud. This language, industrial scale, describes criminal operations as organized and systematic as legitimate industries, not opportunistic criminals exploiting loopholes. Organized enterprises operating across hundreds of facilities, processing billions in fraudulent claims, with infrastructure and coordination resembling legitimate business operations. And the fraud extended beyond Minnesota through fraud tourism. For the first time, they charged 2 men accused of fraud tourism coming from Philadelphia, setting up shell businesses, then billing Minnesota from back home. The message had spread nationally. Minnesota's vault is open, verification is absent, political protection is reliable. Come and get paid. Multiple forces now converge on Minnesota's fraud crisis simultaneously. Federal raids, FBI, surging investigative criminal units, with public takedowns coming soon, congressional subpoenas, Ron Johnson using committee authority to force document production, whistleblower testimony. Employees who reported fraud to Walz now coming forward with retaliation claims, immigration investigation. Kash Patel referring fraudsters for denaturalization and deportation, criminal prosecution. Tom Emmer stating Walz and Ellison may face charges if whistleblower claims are documented. Citizen journalism. 100 million people have seen video evidence that can't be suppressed. Media collapse. Mainstream outlets that refuse to cover the story now forced to acknowledge federal investigation. The protection that allowed this fraud to operate openly for years has collapsed. Not because Minnesota officials decided to do their jobs, they're hiding and scrubbing websites, but because Nick Shirley's 100 million views created public pressure that makes continued protection politically impossible. As federal investigation intensifies, specific questions require answers. For Tim Walz, what did 400 employees tell you about fraud? Why did investigations stop when you became governor? Why did you increase funding to programs you knew were fraudulent? Did you retaliate against whistleblowers who reported fraud? For Ilhan Omar, how did you accumulate $30 million on a congressional salary? What's the relationship between your husband's firm and Obama officials whose names were scrubbed? Why did you sponsor legislation removing oversight from programs that became fraud vehicles? Why did you accept campaign contributions from fraudsters? For Keith Ellison, why did prosecution cease when you became Attorney General? What investigation did your predecessor conduct that you terminated? Did you receive complaints about fraud? Why didn't you investigate? For the Somali community, how many facilities actually provide services versus fraudulent operations? Why didn't community leaders report fraud? Does the community consider welfare fraud acceptable business practice? These aren't rhetorical questions. Federal investigators with subpoena power are asking them, and unlike Minnesota officials who spent years protecting fraud, federal prosecutors under Trump have no political obligation to ignore the answers. Nick Shirley's investigation achieved something unprecedented. It made suppression impossible. Mainstream media could refuse to cover the story. Minnesota officials could continue hiding. Progressive activists could scream about racism. None of it mattered because 100 million people saw the evidence directly. They saw empty buildings collecting millions. They saw facilities with misspelled signs operating for years. They saw healthcare providers who can't explain their healthcare. They saw Somalis following and filming investigators. They saw white liberals protecting fraud. They saw operators refusing to answer basic questions. And they drew the obvious conclusion: this is systematic criminal enterprise enabled by political protection. The 100 million views represent jury verdict, not speculation or partisan attack. Documentary evidence reviewed by a population larger than most countries. And their verdict is clear. Minnesota's fraud isn't isolated criminality. It's government-enabled theft operating at industrial scale. This is not the end of Minnesota's fraud crisis. It's the beginning of accountability. Federal investigations will continue for months or years. Congressional hearings will force testimony under oath. Denaturalization proceedings will determine who entered through fraud. Criminal prosecutions will decide who faces prison. But the decisive moment already occurred. When Nick Shirley's 42-minute investigation received 100 million views and proved that one YouTuber with a camera could expose what billion-dollar media organizations deliberately suppressed. The gatekeepers lost, the suppressors failed, the protection collapsed, and Tim Walz, Ilhan Omar, and every official who enabled this fraud are discovering that 100 million views creates accountability that political connections cannot prevent. The reckoning has begun, and unlike the fraud that operated openly for years, this reckoning won't be hidden, suppressed, or ignored. 100 million people are watching.